I am going to put you into a time machine and take you with me on a journey which I am absolutely sure many of us, if not all of us, are going to take. Ladies and gentlemen, the journey is going to be a bumpy ride, so fasten your seatbelts, but I guarantee you, futurology, which I think is a pseudoscience. To me, futurology is extending and trying to extrapolate the cutting edge of technology and try to foresee what is going to happen in the next 10, 15, 20 years. It is said that fools rush in where angels fear to tread, and I'm obviously not an angel. And many of these things may never ever happen. I am optimistic, and let's see whether any of these things are going to happen. The forecasting of the future on a systematic basis, especially by the study of present affairs, is what is known as futurology. I would like to quote what Obama said. I repeat, as humans, we can identify galaxies light years away. We can study particles smaller than the atom. You're all aware of the God particle. You know that ISRO has launched a mission to Mars. You know it is going to take 11 months to reach the destination. And yet, we know nothing, absolutely nothing, of the mystery of the 3 pounds of matter that lies between our 2 ears. In 1980, when I qualified as a neurosurgeon, after having touched the brain, after having cut the brain, after having stitched the brain, I was stupid enough to think that I know something about the brain. 35 years later, ladies and gentlemen, I have realized that not for the next 200 years will we ever know even 1% of how the brain functions. And the next half an hour I'm going to show you why I think we will never understand this. We all are aware of the decade of the brain in the 20th century, 1990 to 2000. This decade, 2011 to 2021, the first time that a president of the United States, when he was sworn in, mentioned as one of his specific items in which his administration is going to do is to map the human brain in unprecedented detail. He has set apart $300 million per year, that is $3 billion over the next year, and this is not just rhetoric, it has already started. Today, the word brain stands for brain research through advancing innovative neurotechnologies. A technology that can record electrical activity of individual cells. I'm sure every one of you know that there are more cells in my unused brain than there are in people on this galaxy. If all the cells in my brain were taken and put end to end, not packed beautifully as it is now, I would be able to go from the earth to the moon and back several times. That is the mystery of the human brain. This is what we have inside. And this complex electrical activity we know nothing. We have absolutely no idea of how it works. Fundamental understanding of neuronal circuits, their structure, their function and development will one day result in functional neurosurgeons. Today we have a new subspecialty in the Department of Neurosurgery called functional neurosurgery, where we have already started, as I'll show you in the next half an hour, treating conditions which one would never ever have dreamt of in the past. Ladies and gentlemen, Google Earth today on your smartphone, you know precisely where the Savera Hotel is in relation to the Carnegie Hall in New York, in relation to Houston, in relation to Mumbai, everywhere. You know the size of the earth. You know how complex the earth is. And yet you know today in your smartphone, you put A and B and Google Earth will be able to map this. However, in the brain, retrospectively thinking about it, how stupid could we have been to realize that the Broca's area controls speech, that the temporal cortex controls hearing, that the occipital lobe controls vision. It's a height of stupidity if you think that God in his ultimate wisdom would put all eggs in one basket. When I was a student, as a postgraduate and as a teacher, I taught my students the functional anatomy of the brain. I complimented myself. I said this is area 10, this is area 14, and we mapped the brain. We thought we were absolutely smart. But we did not realize that you must have backup copies. Today, even my grandson knows that when he does something on a computer, he is being taught to take a backup. You cannot put all your eggs in one basket. Therefore, with advanced technology, we know today that there are a lot of limitations in the so-called localization of function of the brain. We thought that the left side of the brain controls the right side. Absolutely true. We thought that the speech area is located in the posterior, inferior, frontal convolution, left side, etc., etc. But what we never realized was there is a backup. And there are speech areas in the cerebellum, there are other areas in the brain which, when there is an emergency, can take over the functions. Now, I think I want to drive home this point. Unfortunately, there are some among you who have children, who have grandchildren, who have friends, relatives of children whom I would like to call, to use the correct political term, mentally challenged, not mentally retarded. Yes, it is true that today there are very few reversible conditions which can reverse the primary condition which caused the mental challenge in the first place. But in the next 3 to 4 decades, it is almost certain, once we understand the complexity of the brain, we will be able to devise methods to make use of the unutilized portions of the brain. Again, it's a generally believed that the more you work, the more you study, the more homework you do, the more your brain is working. I remember when I was doing my anatomy exam, second year MBBS, my grandmother told my mother, give him some coffee, give him some extra coffee, he's reading for the exam. You thought that you wanted more energy because more energy is being consumed by the brain. But Albert Einstein, Nobel laureates, people at that level, functional MRI studies have shown that the energy utilization, the consumption of oxygen, the consumption of glucose is absolutely the minimum. Now I'll give you an example. If I were an ordinary person and I am looking at this, what would I do? I would switch on the lights. If I was a little mentally challenged, I would switch on the lights in this podium. If I was a little mentally challenged, I would probably not realize it and I would switch on the lights in this hall. If I was still more mentally challenged, I would probably switch on the lights in Savera, in Nalvarpet, in Thenampet, in Madras City, South India, and so on and so forth. But if I was brilliant, which obviously I am not, I would have used only the light which will power this particular slide and only here. The purpose is served. So in other words, it's a question of utilization of limited resources. And this is where I think we have a tremendous advantage, where resource-limited areas, resource-limited conditions, geographies, etc., that is where the best in you comes out because you're forced to do this. And I think this slide says it all. You can see how mapping of the brain, almost nothing has been done. The greatest achievement, which is what science has done, if you want to call it, is unmapping the human genome. Yesterday, at the Gleneagles Hospital, Apollo, the first personalized medicine, the first personalized master health checkup was formally inaugurated. Never in my life would I have dreamt that in my lifetime there would be a personalized master health checkup. In New Delhi, Gangaram Hospital, several other hospitals in the country have started doing genomic studies to find out whether the ampicillin which the doctor prescribes is really useful for you. Again, how stupid we are. How can we think that the 7 billion people on planet Earth are absolutely the same? Somebody develops urinary infection, we give him an antibiotic. How could we be so crude as to think that the antibiotic has the same activity on X and Y and Z? Today, for less than $100, the chairman of Google's wife has started a company called U23Me, I think, for less than $100. Yes, $100 is still expensive by the Indian context, but nevertheless, for $100 you can map out the entire genetic profile in your 23 chromosomes. So as God himself says, damn hackers, now I have to change the password. So this is what is going to happen. The genetic profile, the construction of the genome, and these slides talk for itself. But what is going to happen in the next decade is a new thing called connectome. And it is felt that this is going to even more revolutionize what the genome is all about. These are not digital manipulations. These are not fancy things done by an artist. But this is what you actually see in color when you do an MRI tractography. Today we can do the pyramidal tract, various other tracts in the brain. You can actually map it out with its intricate areas, and this is what you see. All this is available on the internet, all this is available on Google. And here you can see the Human Connectome project. The challenge is to figure out how all that wiring works. Today we know that the wiring is extremely complex, but we just don't know the why of it. We know the how of it. We know how something happens, but we still don't know why it happens. We know where it happens. We know when it happens, but I have absolutely no idea of the association. Now again, to give you an example, take hearing. Hearing by itself, I listen to M.S. Subbulakshmi, I listen to Michael Jackson. When I listen to the Suprabhadam, it is not the sound which I hear. I look at M.S. Subbulakshmi's figure, her photograph appears in front of my screen, and I am able to transport myself to a new world, a world in which the Suprabhadam has much more meaning to me than the pure rhythm, timbre, and all the sound and the pitch which it has. There's a lot of difference between what is called a courtesan in the former days and a dancer. A courtesan is one who goes through the motions of a dance, but a dancer is one who gives meaning to these physical movements. This is your brain, ladies and gentlemen. This is what you find. Just look at this. And do you really think that any of us are going to understand how this really works? I do not go to the temples. I do not do homam. I do not do what, many of my grandfathers and people would be scandalized. But I really think a neurologist, a neurosurgeon, anybody who has anything to do with the human nervous system is much more religious than all the priests in all the temples put together. When I see this, there has to be somebody above who has made all this. And I don't think external forms of worship alone are necessary. It is 20 years since Francis Crick and Edward Jones in the so-called Decade of the Brain mentioned this, etc. As an MIT neuroscientist said, you are more than your genes, you are your connectome. So this is the word of the future. This is going to happen. How do we connect? I think this word is very important. I really think a good medical doctor, unfortunately this is an endangered species. We are all disappearing from the face of the earth. Today's surgeons are superb technicians. They are fantastic plumbers. They are great carpenters. But they do not necessarily connect. An emotional connect. I was taught by my teachers not to treat a tumor in the brain, not to treat a shadow on an MRI, not to treat a blood sugar value in a lab report. I like to treat the individual. I go one step further. I not only like to treat the individual with the disease, I like to treat the family in which the individual is there with the disease. This emotional connect, Harvard Business Review, the ultimate in business management, the ultimate in analytics. Business management today teaches you how to make money, the ROI, return of interest. But Harvard Business Review, the last couple of years, they have a course called Emotional Quotient. Today, it is not the IQ which is important. Today, it is emotional quotient which is important. There is a difference between managers and leaders. Managers solve problems. Managers identify. Managers have targets to achieve. Whereas leaders have no targets. They have goals. They are emotionally connected. And today, science has shown that emotion plays a major part. A beautiful study which actually came out in the Time magazine a couple of years ago took 100 women with breast cancer stage 3, same age, same sex, Caucasian, etc., compared it with a similar group of identical histopathology. The second group went to church specifically. They had an emotional connect with their family. The family went out of their way to encourage them and so on and so forth. And our 2-year follow-up showed that the T lymphocytes, which is a measurable cell in the bloodstream which directly reflects your immunological competence, they showed that the T lymphocytes had increased by almost 3 times. Neuroimmunology, psychoneuroimmunology, these are the new subjects. What my great-great-great-grandfather said today has been shown to be scientifically true. The emotional connect is much more important. Unfortunately, we have very, very vague idea of how exactly this happens in the brain. So for lack of time, I'm not going into the details, but excepting to show you that from anatomy of the brain, we are now going into physiology of the brain, we are going into the biochemistry of the brain, and we are going one level higher. We are trying to understand, if at all we can, about something called the mind. The brain is the hardware, the mind is the software. A TV set, the most beautiful TV set, 3D TV set, is absolutely of no use unless you have programs which are compatible with that hardware. But again, the most brilliant software programs are of no use if you don't have a processor, if you don't have a high-speed processor which can capture this. So where is the mind? Today we know several areas in the brain have been identified as contributing to some of the functions of the mind. The agony, the ecstasy, the happiness, the sorrow, the ability to empathize, the ability to sympathize with the patient. We know exactly what happens in the brain. I know that this part of the brain flares up, that part of the brain flares up. We know the functional MRI, but still there is a missing link. What is it that brings hearing, vision, giving it a meaning, all this together? We still don't know, and we are far, far away from it. Studying the brain obviously means understanding the mind. And I'm sure all of you know, we have all children, grandchildren, etc. I've seen very educated people, adults. There are so many mistakes between scent and send. Today, the functional MRI has shown, identified, that in the language area of the brain, this particular cluster of neurons controls adverbs. This controls verbs, nouns, prepositions, conjunctions, syntax, grammar. To that extent, imaging of the brain has been successful. Why isn't my brain working? If I knew the answer to that question, I'd probably get 20 Nobel Prizes. And here you see, I always feel that we are wrongly accusing somebody. We say he's totally unsympathetic. We say he doesn't know that, he doesn't know this, etc., etc. Who is he? Who am I? This is the million-dollar question, which for centuries people have not been answered. Do you know who you are? I don't know. Who am I? What am I? And here you can see daycare, money, communication, bed sores. I think this slide says it all. Different parts of the brain are wired in different ways, and that is why you behave as you are. Of course, you can take this to absurd extremities. A couple of years ago in the US Californian Supreme Court, a rapist was being tried, and the defense advocate came up with an MRI and showed that there was some structural changes in the amygdala, in the hippocampus. And he said, this is a biological aberration. It is not my client who raped somebody. It is his brain, because of a structural abnormality, which made him do this so-called antisocial act. How can you punish my client for something which God has done? Here is the MRI. Here is the proof. So where do we draw the line? With functional MRI becoming more and more sophisticated like this. In the future, I believe, in the real world, today, why should a terrorist be locked up in Tihar jail, and why should I as a taxpayer contribute to the 20 crores which probably is spent over a 5-year period, the security, that, this, etc. How much more simpler it is, and it's possible today, right now. I can do it. Make a small hole in the skull, do a deep brain stimulation, put an electrode into that particular area of the brain which generates this antisocial nature, and put a chip inside, implant a chip. We are all familiar with remote. From this I can switch on a TV at the end of the room. All of this, do this every day. So using the same technology, let him out on parole so long as he's within a geographic area. The police constable of the future, the inspector of the future, will be trained in neurophysiology. He will be looking at a screen with 20, 30 people on parole with chips inside their brain. And when a thought process of an antisocial nature, I pass through a jewelry shop, I see a lot of jewels there, I want to take a stone and hit it. All this generates electricity. All this generates magnetism. Today we have the technology to take out, I'll show you that in a few minutes, to actually take out and extract
that particular electrical waves. And therefore, it is possible theoretically today to identify an antisocial act even at the thought process, even before the thought is allowed to be translated into a motor action. Any action has got a sensory and a motor component. The first is the idea. I want to take a stone and hit it. That is the first concept. But for me to translate that, obviously it has to go through the corpus callosum. It has to go from the left side of the brain. It has to go to the opposite side of the brain. It must stimulate the motor area of the brain. It must stimulate the hand control area of the brain. I must bend down. I must take a stone. I must lift it. So we can break down this into 250 different components. And today we can say precisely which component is responsible for what. Once we know that, it is not too difficult to interrupt this sequence of events of these 250 points. This interruption can be done at different levels, at different stages. And today we can interrupt it even before the thought process is translated into a motor phenomenon. So in the future, it is quite conceivable that the terrorists of the future, neurosurgeons will be involved, and who knows, they may be honorary consultants to the police forces as well. Neuromarketing. IIM Indore last year started offering a course on neuromarketing. Harvard Business Review for the last 4 years has started offering full courses on neuromarketing. I happened to be at the Coca-Cola head office at Atlanta. Of course, I was refused permission. I couldn't go inside, but I was told by one of the senior vice presidents there that Coca-Cola for the last 5 years are employing neurophysiologists from Stanford University and spending millions of dollars to try to understand in detail how information is processed when you see an ad on the TV, and what is it that makes the information which you process from the sensory reception into a motor phenomena. I mean, they are not really interested in neurophysiology of the brain. They want to increase their shares value. So what is it that will make a guy go to a shop and buy a Coke? And this has already been identified. The next step is to artificially introduce a mechanism whereby he'll be forced to do it. So neuromarketing activities specific for taste and so on, these are going to come. Now these are going to create problems, hundreds of thousands of problems. Neuroethics. Today we have a journal of neuroethics. We have international societies of neuroethics. We have annual conferences of neuroethics. Neuroethics has become a subspecialty in some of the neurological departments in the world. Enhancement. I mean, never in my life would I have dreamt that a neurosurgeon would someday be called. All the time we were taught, and this is what I taught, to remove. You remove a blood clot in the brain. You remove a tumor in the brain. You remove pus inside the brain. But can you imagine a day when you get surgical help to augment your facilities? Now please see the distinction. I am not talking of treating mentally challenged children. I am talking of treating a guy with an IQ of 95. He wants to get into IIT. He wants to get into IIM. Is there a method to augment the so-called average capacity and make them into a genius? Augmentive, restorative, cosmetic neurology. There are any number of papers being published on this, and this is what is going to happen. The court, High Court, Supreme Courts in the United States, in Europe, particularly in Denmark and Norway, have ordered central nervous system interventions. Where is the freedom to think your own thoughts? Will an IAS officer of the future, will an IPS officer, an Air Force officer of the future, during his interview, will he have a functional MRI done? Perhaps MRI could tell you not only the structure of the brain, it can tell you the physiology of the brain. Do you think future prime ministers and presidents should undergo this sort of neurophysiological imaging? We already have the technology. It's only the question of applications of these technology. Genetic counseling. This is going to open a Pandora's box. It's available. Discrimination. If I am the CEO of an insurance company, why should I accept a premium from a lady who is pregnant, knowing fully well with scientific data that her unborn child is going to develop cancer breast 18 years later? Angelina Jolie removed both her breasts. We are no longer talking theory. When I used to give similar talks few years ago, it was talking theory. Angelina Jolie has removed both her breasts. Somebody else has removed a prostate in England because genetically it's at a very high chance. Where do we draw the line? Do we do this just for cancers? Would you like to know that you may develop with a 99% certainty Alzheimer's disease when you're 85? I am 63 and happy and full of this thing. I don't want to know now that 15 years from now I'm going to develop Alzheimer's disease. Today science gives you that ability to do that. So this is going to cause much more problems than benefits at all. We are going to have a new generation. Genetic haves, genetic have-nots. We are going to call them damaged goods